Good morning. Today is April 10th in the year 2020. It is Good Friday, and appropriately enough, we will be dealing with Jesus' crucifixion in our study of the Gospel of Mark. We're going to begin in chapter 14, verse 66. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When he saw Peter warming himself, he looked closely at him. "You also were with the Nazarene Jesus," she said, but he denied it. "I don't know what you are." "I don't know or understand what you're talking about," he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, "This fellow is one of them." Again he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, "Surely you are one of them, for you are Galilean." He began to call down curses on himself, and he swore to them, "I don't know this man you're talking about." Immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. "Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. Last time we talked a lot about not knowing exactly what we would do until extreme circumstances. I'm not going to belabor that point here. I will say that it's interesting that Peter's accent portrays him as Galilean. The Judeans thought of themselves as sophisticated, the Galileans as hicks. So, because he talks like a country boy, Peter is revealed as one of Jesus's followers. If you've never seen it, I would highly recommend the Cotton Patch Gospel. I imagine if you do a little searching, you can find it. The scene of Peter's denial is great in that production. Check it out. Mark chapter 15. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached the decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. They're doing this because they cannot legally execute somebody. And with all the uproar, no doubt, around Jesus and the state of the city, they want some legitimacy to what is essentially a lynching. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priest accused him of many things. So again, Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they're accusing you of?" But Jesus still made no reply, and Peter was amazed. Now it was the custom of the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. By the way, we have no historical record of this. Pilate was in Judea because he had severely messed up as governor of another province closer to home. There, he had failed to put down a resurrection. It may be that Pilate was willing to bend the rules to keep people happy. So, he says in verse 9, "Do you want me to release you, the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. Knowing it was out of envy, the chief priest had handed Jesus over. The chief priest stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Luke in particular has a much longer trial of Jesus, but that's not Mark's intent. Mark shows enough evidence to show that Jesus was forced through the system illegitimately. It reminds his readers that Jesus is innocent and yet is going to be killed anyway. Given the situation they are experiencing, there may be members of their circle, their own families even, who've gone through some of the same things. For no other reason than their faith, they were beaten, tortured, even killed. The word martyr simply means witness. And that was how the early Christians thought of those who died. Witnesses for their faith. Jesus is soon going to be a witness for the truth of the gospel. The soldiers led Jesus away and into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, and twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. They began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on his knees, they paid homage to him. When they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. They led him out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country. They forced him to carry the cross. Just a note that this man is identified by his sons, which suggests that Mark's audience knows who these people are, either personally or by reputation. Otherwise, what's the point in mentioning them? They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see who would get what each would get. It was the third hour when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified two robbers with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said. "He cannot save himself. Let this Christ, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Remember, Mark is wanting to portray Jesus' death as a total abandonment, which is why he's going to say something interesting here in a minute. Nobody is with Jesus. Nobody is supporting him. John has a sympathetic figure in the disciple whom Jesus loved and his mother standing at the cross. The other Gospels have one of the ones crucified saying, "Oh, leave him alone, he's not done anything wrong." But Mark paints a picture of total abandonment, complete aloneness. Again, he is communicating with his audience that when they experience those times when they may feel utterly betrayed, utterly alone, suffering, they experience what Jesus experienced. They, in a way, participate in this crucifixion as the sacrifice. These are people who are hurting, and by showing them what Jesus went through, he comforts them to some degree, I think. The 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. In the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Again, John's depiction of Jesus in the crucifixion is him fulfilling his destiny. He came down from the Father, he's going back, and the way of the cross is his path. For Luke, the crucifixion is a heroic thing. For Matthew, the fulfillment of Scripture. For Mark, it's painful. It's horrible. It's utter abandonment. And Jesus cries out on the cross. And we already know that from what he says in the garden, he realizes this is his destiny. And he has prayed, not my will, but my Father's. But no matter how much faith we may have, there are going to be times when we feel like God has betrayed us. We're going to feel like God has abandoned us. And it is okay to express our emotions. It's okay to feel that way. Mark shows Jesus on the cross feeling that way. You have a very human Jesus here. One who, as Hebrews says, can completely understand all of our faults and weaknesses. The agony he must have been in, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. That in that moment, he gave up everything. Just his life, but his relationships. To come in that moment to a point of utter separation. To reach the point that we in ourselves are. In Genesis, in many ways, the consequences of Adam and Eve's sin are a disruption of relationship. The man and woman's relationship is broken. The relationship with their own bodies is broken. The relationship with nature is broken. And the relationship with God is broken. Here, Jesus experiences that for the first time in his life. And he calls out in horror at what he's feeling. When some of those standing near heard him, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." One man ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on his stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance, among them Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, the younger of the Joses, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him from Jerusalem were also there. This is interesting. The only ones brave enough to actually go to the cross and see what are happening are the women. The women who are his support and have been his support all along. The disciples who get all the credit and all the name recognition have all run off. The women are at a distance, maybe a safe distance so that they're not too closely associated. Maybe they don't want to see things too clearly. Can't blame them. Not a fun thing to watch somebody die. It's happened to me a few times. But they at least are there. It was preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph brought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped him in linen, placed it in a tomb cut out of the rock. He rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid. Crucifixion is a terrible death. It is not the wounds that kill you, it is suffocation, as your body's own weight makes it impossible for you to breathe. That Jesus died so quickly was what surprised Pilate. He just gave up and died. And so Joseph of Arimathea places Jesus in a, as we say, borrowed tomb. I think we'll go ahead and finish up Mark today. Appropriate for Good Friday. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on the way to the tomb. They asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of the Nazarene, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. Go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Again, we have the women willing to do something perhaps that none of the rest are willing to do. They go to the tomb. There they are greeted by a figure in white, a messenger of God, an angel, who says he's not here, he's risen. And the women leave, afraid and not telling anyone. This is probably the last line in the original version of Mark. It ends this way with no resurrection appearances of Jesus, just the message it has happened. And those followers who have heard it are afraid of what has gone on. Mark's readers, Mark's hearers are in that position. They have not seen Jesus. They have simply heard he rose from the dead. From possibly less trustworthy sources than an angel in a tomb. They don't know what to do. They are afraid, and telling people is dangerous. And yet there is hope that what the angel says is true. Now, why do I say the gospel ends there, even though you've got 11 more verses? The oldest, best manuscripts don't have those 11 verses. When we look at them carefully, we find almost a dozen words that don't appear anywhere else in the gospel. We find an attempt to reconcile Mark with the other gospels. The ending that they left and told no one is unsatisfying. It's disturbing, even. And so we can see how early collectors of the New Testament would have felt like, oh, there was a piece missing. Let's reconstruct it. But I don't think that's necessary. We have the other Gospels. We know Jesus made appearances. We don't have to have Mark tell us that. Rather, Mark stands on its own as a gospel for people in uncertain times, afraid to say what they think, afraid to act on their faith, because they are unsure of the consequences. I have made the analogy through this whole study that we, in the current situation of COVID, we don't know what's going on. We may be afraid. We may be alone. And I have made the analogy there that that's somewhat similar to the readers of Mark. But there's a bigger issue going on in our society. There are those of us of faith who may be afraid to speak because our words are taken as political. We do need to care about consequences of our actions. We do need to think about how our words impact others. We need to speak the truth when given opportunity. But I read these and I see these women who are the most supportive of Jesus, the only ones in the Gospel of Mark who really come off well, other than Jesus himself. Religious leaders don't. Romans are okay, but they're not great. Disciples come off poorly. The women, though, are at least there. And they, too, are afraid and tell no one. Consider your fear and consider its sources. We are told perfect love drives out fear. God calls us to more than what we have been, more than what we are doing. On this Good Friday, consider what was given to you, what was sacrificed for you to restore those relationships that were broken. And ask yourself how far you are willing to go in the path of Jesus. God keep you safe. Join us Sunday for an Easter service. And on Tuesday of next week, we will begin a new book. What that's going to be, I don't know yet. But until then, God bless you.